because the real sermon starts when the service ends. Welcome to Beyond the Pulpit, where faith meets the real world. We're stepping outside the sanctuary to talk real life, real struggles, and a real God who shows up on Mondays just as much as he does on Sundays. This isn't just preaching, it's purpose in motion. It's where the message becomes the mission. So pull up a seat, open your heart, and get ready to live your life out loud. This is Beyond the Pulpit, where the Word keeps working long after the benediction. Hello, my name is Pastor Donald Curtis of the Moraine City First Church of God, and today this is Beyond the Pulpit. And we're going to do something a little different than we've done ever before. Typically, we'll have people come on, and my wife will either do a cooking show, and we'll do a devotion, or I'll interview somebody or somebody's different people. Today, I've had the tables flipped on me just a little bit, and I'm going to be interviewed. Our producer, Brian Hatton, has decided or thought about it. He says, it'd be good to hear from the pastor. So today, I'm going to be, as best I can, an open book and answer the questions, and hopefully you'll get something out of this as we go through it. So it's going to be sitting on the different side of the table. So I want to introduce to you, first of all, my interviewer is Darrell Webb, and he's part of our congregation. He's a wonderful part of that. He's our ministry leader, and he's a blessing to us. So welcome, Brother Darrell.
It's good to be here. Really great to be here. This is an unusual opportunity for me in that I get to interview the pastor, and I think this is important, Pastor, simply because so many people, in fact, all of us know you as pastor, but sometimes people, that's all they know about you.
Sure.
And it's nice to know something about where you came from and what your interests are, and how you spend your time here at the church as far as preparing for messages and things that sometimes we don't know about. That is the hard work of being a pastor sometimes that nobody ever really sees. Pastor has to spend time with the Lord. Sometimes he has to spend time fixing broken hinges on doors and things like that. So our purpose here this morning is just to get to know you a little bit better. And I'll kind of let you talk for a minute, and maybe I'll ask a question here and there, but I'll kind of put it in your lap. If you would, just tell us way back at the beginning. Maybe we know you came from Kentucky and that you're a Kentucky Wildcats fan, and
Amen.
A lot of this type thing, but kind of where you started, where your roots lie, and then we'll try to work our way back to where we sit today.
Okay. Well, I was born in a family that was new and early because I'm the oldest of 5 kids. I'm the oldest son, and then I was one other brother and 3 sisters. And my family started living in the place they live in now, which is Clay City, Kentucky, about the time of my birth. And they started going to a little church down there. It's Powell's Valley Baptist Church. My mom and dad moved to get closer to the church, and they were really intricately involved. They would clean the church, they'd teach Sunday school, drive the church bus. Dad was one of the stars on the church softball teams. He even played Jesus in the church plays. I mean, they were very, very involved. And Dad would work on second shift. And I've heard stories many times from my mom about him working on second shift and then reading the Bible after he would get off and stay up late to be able just to read the Bible, get in the Word. And so that was kind of the starting. But the problem was, somewhere along the line, they left the church, and they left their faith in many ways. And so when I was growing up, I really didn't have much church in my life. We hardly ever went to church, very, very sporadic. And so it was a little different growing up years than most people, especially my wife, of course, she's grown up in church, almost been born in church. And I didn't have that. Um, it was strange to grow up. And then finally, we started going to church, and I went to a Baptist church. There's a youth minister that came along, really involved with the youth, and really, I don't know, he just something special about him that kind of just made me want to go to the youth group at there. I was invited by a young lady, of course, to come to church, and I got involved in the youth group, and he was really something that, I don't know, impacted my life and gave me the message of Christ. I don't even know if he gave me right, do you want to be saved or anything. It's just the way he acted, talked, and the way he loved the young people. I was very involved. And so I got saved as a senior in high school, believe it or not. To me, the most unlikely time to get saved in your life, because I was, relatively popular. I'd done sports and band and all kinds of different things, and just never really had a direction toward church. And then all of a sudden I get saved, and it literally changed everything about me. Mm-hmm. Everything about me. The Lord really just, I mean, when I got saved, I'm like my father in some ways, because when I do something, it's all or nothing. And so when I got saved, man, it was all I could be. It's just be a Christian.
The Lord had a plan even back then.
Yeah.
Maybe you didn't know what the plan was.
Yeah.
Or what it was going to be even.
Mm-hmm.
But he had a plan. And when you took that first step,
yeah,
then here we are.
Brother Darrell, I'm thankful that God doesn't take us at our word sometimes, because when I was just a few years before I getting saved as a senior in high school, I was 15 years old. I'll never, ever forget it, especially now. And I kind of laugh about it now. And I was sat there, and my mother was talking to me one day, and she says, I want you to go to church with me. And I looked at her, not disrespectful, just uninterested, and says, you'll never catch me in another church house. I'm done with church. And I really hadn't even went that much, didn't even know much about it, but I just had no interest in it at all. I tell people all the time, I say, I think God has a great sense of humor, because he sat there and listened to what I said as an ignorant 15-year-old boy that thought he knew everything, right. How we are. And then just a few years later, God got a hold of my heart and saved me. And I started going to a Baptist church in Stanton, Kentucky, which is just a few miles up the road. And man, like I said, I was really involved in the church and things, and actually started to become a part of more of the youth leader at that time, because he moved on. And I asked my mom to go to church, because I thought, man, I want my mom to have what I have, And so I started asking, I said, Mom, why don't you go to church with me? And she says, I'll go to church if you go to my church. And I'm not trying to be disrespectful even with this statement, but I had to ask her, where is your church? I really didn't know what she was talking about, because we hadn't went to church enough to even know what was she calling her church. And she named the church down in West Bend, and it was the Church of God. And I said, I tell you what, Mom, I'll go to your church one time, and then you can go to my church one time. And I thought, that way I get her in church twice instead of just once. And I thought I was really being brilliant, And so we went to church, to her church, as she called it. And I'm telling you, when I walked in that church and we started having service, I had never experienced anything up to that point in my life. Never experienced anything like that before in my life. I mean, the Spirit of God was so real and so evident. I didn't know what I was even feeling and experiencing and knowing. And man, that service was going on. The singing was going on. The preacher started preaching with all of his heart. And I'd never seen that, because in the church that I was attending at that time, the preacher was honestly pretty dry, to be very honest with you. And the preacher that we had there, Harold Kelly, and he's still my pastor even today. At least I consider him as my pastor. He started preaching, and I'll never forget. I don't remember the words he said. I don't remember what message he had, but I remember the power and the influence it had on my heart. And my goodness, it changed me. And I'd never been back to that other church since. I stayed going to that church from then on, and it was pretty miraculous. because every service that we had, it just seemed like a revival service.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the altars were full. People were tearing up. People were doing business with God. It was pretty amazing. I miss that, and sometimes in churches we don't see that as much anymore.
Right, and we want to look for the times when God really moves.
Yeah.
And we pray for a move, we look for a move, and sometimes God's moving, but we aren't always seeing
Right.
it or feeling it.
That still small voice.
And God
Yeah.
was directing you from one place to another, and maybe He used your mother to do it.
Yeah, sure.
That's all hindsight, but
Yeah.
God had a plan.
And I see that. I can look back now. Hindsight's 2020, and I can look back now in my life and see the steps that I made that I had no clue that God was orchestrating all the way through. He, like you said, He had a plan, and I didn't know the plan.
Right.
I was just doing, as you will, the best I could to be me and to be what I thought was right. And God was guiding my life even through every step, through the youth leader that helped me, to my mom asking me to come to the other church, to my pastor, who became a very important, vital part of my life and give me some direction that I needed for sure.
And again, that's partly why we're here, is that pastors serve an important part of our life.
Yeah.
And tell us now, your salvation came, and I know some of us know, others do not know,
Mhm.
but tell us a little bit how you went from being saved to a young people's leader into the mission field.
Yeah.
Tell about that transition.
Yeah, and that's another. I tell you, the Lord. I'm glad God sees more than we do. Is the best way I know how to say it. But my pastor now, Harold Kelly, his son was named Harold Kelly as well, Junior. And we called him Little Harold back then. Me and Little Harold we became very good friends, and we'd hang out quite a bit together, run together, and we'd go fishing together. I remember one time he came over the house and he says, "Hey, let's go frog gigging." I don't know if y'all do much frog gigging up here, but in Kentucky, we done quite a bit. And he says, "Let's go frog gigging." It was pretty late. My mother says, "Tonight's not tonight." We laughed. Even today, we'll talk about that. Say, "Tonight's not tonight." And so this particular day, we were just riding in the back of the car. Brother Kelly was driving us somewhere. I don't know where we was going, what we was doing. But my pastor asked, he says, "You know what? I know where you need to be." And I'll never forget the words. And it's like it was yesterday. It just keeps ringing in my head. And I looked at him and I thought, he's wanting to get rid of me. I've been here too long, and he's tired of putting up with me, and he wants me to go home. And I said, "Oh yeah, where's that?" And he said, "You need to be in Guatemala." And I have been raised, even though I wasn't really raised in the church, I've been raised to be respectful to everybody,
Sure.
especially a pastor. And I looked at him, and probably for the first time in my life, I said, "That's too far from my mama's cooking." I said, "I'm not, thank you, but no thank you. I'd rather go home than do that." There's nothing. I never knew what mission work was. I never had any desire to go. I had a plan, honestly. I was going through college to be a nurse. I was going to get my degree, move up the chain of the ladder, that kind of thing. Take care of people, because I like to do that. But move up and make good money and make a good living. So that was my role. That was what I thought I was going to do. But Brother Darrell, when he mentioned, and it's all he said, he didn't say, "Hey, you got to go." No, there was no pressure, no pushing. And he said, "I think you need to go to Guatemala." I said, I don't think so. For 2 solid weeks, I could not eat, sleep, do anything without thinking, "You're supposed to go. You're supposed to go." And I had all kinds of arguments, as sometimes we do.
Sure.
of why I couldn't go. I don't have the money, don't have the time, don't want to, all those kind of things. And I just couldn't get away from, I need to go. I've got to go. And so somehow, I don't even really remember how, but somehow I've raised the money to do it and said, hey, you know what? I want to go on a trip. And so I made my first trip to Guatemala with Brother Kelly, and the founder down there I met is John Collins of the mission in Guatemala is where we went. And my goodness, it changed my life forever. It really made, I never knew what it's amazing what God done to me, because I went from a hesitant, I don't know if I want to do this, I don't really interested, I'm not, even want to, and to the point where I set foot on that ground, got there. And I remember John Collins gave me, because I went through nursing school, and he gave me this bag full of aspirins and Tylenol, and I don't even a stethoscope, and just a few little things that we started with. And he said, okay, here's to get you started. And and so I started just taking care of some people that was right around there in the mission. And it was extremely primitive. It was very plain. There was only a block buildings, all we had. It wasn't very, it wasn't developed at all. It was a very primitive mission. And I knew when that first day that I was there, I thought, and I almost cry even thinking about it. I said, this is where I'm supposed to be. And I knew God's calling. Now that was the beginning of it. We went the rest of the week, and I was convinced. I was convinced this is what God called me to do. So I come home, and I'm talking to my mom and dad, who don't go to church. Remember, they don't go to church, and I'm talking to my mom and dad about this trip that I had, and I said, I am moving to Guatemala. And even though I was a little older, early 20s, 20, 21, something like that, my mother looked at me. She says, if that pastor wants some son to go to Guatemala, send his own. She was not having it. My dad looked at me and he says, I don't know what kind of culture you're involved in, but we've got a different plan. But even against my mom and dad's will, I was convinced I had to go. And man, I tell you, I'm so thankful I did, because it really changed my whole thinking of the church in general. Just what we see and what we know, and how big the church really is compared to what sometimes we get our mindset on.
We look at parents sending their child to school, and their purpose is to give you a good life, for you to be successful. And when we think of success, money comes up really quick.
Sure.
It's how much money am I going to make?
Yeah.
But I see this as step one. God used your mother to kind of change your direction a little bit.
She didn't know it, but he did it.
And then Pastor Kelly just put a thought in your mind.
Yeah.
Then let the Spirit of God deal with it.
Yeah.
And God began to move on you. And that's exciting.
Yeah.
Because that's the way it works. And it hasn't changed.
Yeah.
But now he's moved you to Guatemala.
Yeah.
How much time did you spend there?
Well, about 3.5 years, I lived in Guatemala. I'll never forget the first time that I went down there, because I went with Brother Kelly when I moved there permanently. I moved there, and Brother Kelly, my pastor, and John Collins, the founder, went with me. And they were there for about a week, and it went really well. Had a good, I was enjoying myself, kind of getting to know the area, the people and stuff, because they speak all Spanish. I at that time for sure spoke hillbilly, at the best, Kentuckian, and never spoke a word of Spanish. So you can imagine my dilemma here. And then everything was okay because Brother Kelly and John Collins was there. And then all of a sudden it was weeks up and they're going home. And I came back to the mission for the first time. Reality really set in. And I thought, what have I done? I don't know how to speak to these people. I wasn't able to do. I didn't know anybody, you know. And so it was, to be very honest with you, it was, I hate to use the word scary, but it was scary.
Sure.
The first day that I woke up, that I slept there in a just little block building, I opened my, I remember, forget my, I learned my first lesson on the mission field. My headboard or my bed was against the wall, and I just was laying there on the pillow, and I opened my eyes, and I seen a scorpion crawling toward my head. I thought, that's my welcoming committee. I hope this is not a sign as what yet to come. And so it was pretty. So I'll never, 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 if you ever go to the mission field or any foreign country, don't put your head or your bed next to the wall. Keep it a little space. I learned that quickly. But I started learning the language extraordinarily fast, I think. And I didn't learn it from some school. I didn't ever actually go to school for quite some time. I learned it from the kids. The kids would
Mhm.
walk up the street and they say, that's a house, that's a car, that's a, road, that's whatever. And they start naming the nouns of that's a tree or whatever they name. And I started learning all the names of everything. And then I only went to school to learn Spanish, because Spanish, the conjugation of verbs, just like we have. Um, so I went to school for 1 week, and I stayed with a Guatemalan family, and learned more of the structure of your little sentences, how to say things.
Mhm.
And I really got pretty good at it. I was pretty, I could get around with no problem. Let's say I'm not a perfect Spanish speaker for sure, or reader or listener, but I can do pretty good. I can get around pretty easily. And so it's pretty exciting to me. That was a major hurdle to overcome. But even that, God provided the ability to do it.
A language barrier can be a big barrier,
Oh, yes.
but the spirit and leading of the Lord removes all barriers.
Sure. Yeah.
And I have a friend who is Cuban, and when we got to know each other, we kind of made a pact. I was going to teach him hillbilly,
Yeah.
and he was going to teach me Spanish. 20 years later, he told me, he said, I think I'm getting good at hillbilly, but he called me Webby.
Yeah.
Said, you will never learn Spanish. So
Yeah.
that's the difference in God helping and
that's
trying
right.
to do it on your own. Sometimes we just need him to lead us.
Right. When you engulf yourself, though, and you're there, it's not I'd like to do that kind of thing.
Right.
This was, I have to do this. One, to survive.
Right.
And two, to do what I'm here for.
Mm-hmm.
My purpose was not just to survive and make it, but is actually to do what it's here for. And my mission for general purposes at the beginning was to do medical work, because of my nursing background and the things I learned in school. And so I began to, people started coming to me. And when they would come to me, they could be pointing. You don't know what they're saying. It's kind of
Right.
hard to treat them. So I started learning really well what they were saying, what's necessary, all that kind of thing. So my goodness, I became the doctor of the village, because there really wasn't any doctors at all around, per se, and they were in Civil War back then. So we was in the middle of a Civil War. I've seen bomb bridges, people get shot right in the middle of the daylights in their streets, in their cars. Riots right up in front of my home. There was riots where the people had sticks and stones and bottles and everything, and the police had riot gear. I mean, it was crazy. So I've had a lot of crazy experiences, but I'm telling you, even through all that, God has used, I don't even that, to develop who I am today and make me appreciate just humanity and God's purpose, God's will. It's been pretty amazing. But in my doctor's or medical field background, like I said, I became a doctor. And so what I would do is go from one clinic to another. And my clinics, I had one building, small building, that had medicine that I stocked and stored in, and they came to visit me. But all my other clinics were villages. So I'd go to a certain village each day of the week and have a schedule. And so all the village people would come to that area, or that house is what it was.
Yeah.
Somebody would let me use their house. And they would let me use that house to make my makeshift clinic. And so I would treat them for whatever's wrong with them. And I was their only hope because there was no other doctors. And even if there was, they couldn't afford it, especially back then. And so I began taking care of people. And somewhere in the mix of all that, the people started having babies, of course, and they came to me because I was the doctor of the village. And so I've started delivering babies for different ladies and really start doing everything for that. And I've delivered over 25 babies in my lifetime. And thank the Lord, all of them's healthy and doing well today. One of my biggest joys was we were removed probably 30 years from that time, maybe, from when I was living there. And we got to go on a mission trip last fall and to go back down there. And I got to see the babies that I delivered. It makes me feel old now, but it makes the babies that I delivered that are now adults. And they're policemen and lawyers and physical therapists. And, you know, I just heard the success story. I thought I had a small hand in helping them into this world. I thought that was pretty amazing. I just get touched by that.
And that is a source of pride because God allowed you to be there to do that.
Just be a part.
And if you hadn't have been there, who knows?
Yeah. Yeah, because there was a lot of people, a lot of babies back then, of course, in that primitive time. A lot of them died from simple things that weren't done correctly. And so not only would I deliver the babies, but I would train midwives, you know, to deliver babies, train them the right way to do things. And so it was, you know, I enjoyed it. I've got all kinds of stories, but one, if you don't mind, I'll share with you as the doctor. But way late in the night, probably early in the morning, probably 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, I guess. I remember we're in Civil War, and so if somebody knocks on your door at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, you make sure you know who's on the other side. And so this person was knocking on my door, and I asked him, "Who is this? And what did you want? And what's going on?" And he said, my wife, she's going to die. Please come, please come." Finally, I figured it was pretty earnest and he was honest about it. So I opened the door and he started telling me his wife had delivered the baby but she's bleeding and she's going to die. Please come. I don't have anybody else. There's no other doctors. So me and my little pastor friend that was there, Guatemalan, we go out there as fast as we can. He says, just a little ways. A little ways to them could be 10 miles. I mean, you know, so we walked and finally got to this village. And when we got to this village, this little old hut, stick walls, grass roof, dirt floors. They had candles inside. That's all they had, no electric. And I go in to try to assess the issue, what's going on. And naturally, she had a baby. And what this lady had done was basically a partial hysterectomy with that baby. And so she was bleeding eternally, hemorrhaging blood. I knew we were in serious trouble here because she was losing a lot of blood really fast. She had all of her daughters around her. And she was telling them, this is what your responsibility will be. This is your, you know, she would set everybody else down and let them know this is what you're going to do. When I die, she had already determined I'm probably going to live through this. This is what you're going to do. I tried to start IVs and tried to do a blood pressure. It was her weak. She had such a weak, thready pulse. It was almost nothing. Tried to start IVs, it would collapse every time just because of her dehydration and the bleeding so much. I sent my little pastor buddy on a little 80 Yamaha motorcycle, that's all we had, and he went as fast as he could to get the ambulance. Now, I'm going to use that term loosely, but it's an ambulance. And it seemed like for eternity. And so I'm working with her, trying to keep her alive, you know, doing what I can. And then all of a sudden, it's been a while, but the ambulance comes up. I mean, and it's like a 1960 DeSoto or something. It's a really old car, and they're bouncing up this dirt road to get to us. We sit there, we get her and put her in the middle in the car in the back seat. Pastor on one side, and her, and then me on the other side. She says her goodbyes to her family. And as we're going, and it's pitch dark, No street lights, no nothing.
Mm-hmm.
We're going and getting ready to go to the hospital, and we just get on the main blacktop road, which was quite a ways from where we were. I could tell her pulse was getting even weaker. She was about to lose consciousness. This woman was dying. And I told the driver, I said, stop the car. She's not going to make it if we continue like we are. We stopped right in the middle of the road. And I took the IV fluid and told the pastor to hold it up with his hand. Got it there. I'd already tried this multiple times with the light of the candles. Couldn't get her IVs going. This time I took her arm. And I said, I'm going to start an IV. I took her arm and I prayed. And I said, Lord, you know this woman and you know her family. And you know the situation. God, would you please guide my hands where I can put this IV in her arm so that she can make it and get to the hospital and survive. I was desperate because I didn't want this woman who had all these responsibilities and you could tell was well loved by her family. It had to be God. I put my hand there, closed my eyes because I couldn't see anyway. And God guided that needle right into the vein, opened the IV fluid, and it flowed as pretty as any IV could ever do. I didn't do that. It was only the hand of God that showed mercy upon that woman. We got her to the hospital. I didn't hear from her for a few days. And then all of a sudden, one day, she comes to visit me because she's doing great. Baby in arm. And I see her and I give her a hug and she says, oh, Dr. Ginaldo. That's what they call me in Guatemala. I said, I am so glad to see you. She says, when I got to the hospital, they asked me, who started this IV? And she said, the great white doctor. That's what she called me, the great white doctor. And she said, the doctor told her at the hospital, if that IV hadn't have been started right when it was, you would have never made it to the hospital. That, just thinking of how God used that situation and that circumstances for his glory, it just, I don't know, it tears me up. It makes me have a drive for God more and more because I know God can do anything, everything. Because I've seen too many miracles like that you can't convince me otherwise. So missions has changed my life. It really has.
As Christians, sometimes we're taught to be fearless. But when fear comes and desperation sets in, prayer changes everything.
Amen. It does.
And that's the tool we have, the resource we have that the world just don't know anything about.
Yeah, yeah. I really don't understand how people can make it without the Lord anymore.
No.
As much discouragement, disheartenment, the division, just people that's angry. I can understand that more and more, though, because they don't have God.
Right.
But because we have the Lord, those people, honestly, in Guatemala, I done a lot of things for them, medical work. I was their preacher, their teacher, their builder. I was it because I was the only one there. Mm-hmm. But those people taught me more than I think that I'll ever teach them because they taught me humility. They taught me trusting upon the Lord. They didn't have any other. They couldn't have social services or a government that could help them or something like. They just had God.
Yeah.
And man, when they would pray, it felt like heaven came low. Mm-hmm. And I want people to know that God's the same God here as he is there.
Right.
But I'm afraid that we've lost our passion for God and our need for God. Mm-hmm. And if we'll get more and more in tune with what we really need him more than anything else, More than anything else we have, we need God.
So you spent 3.5 years roughly in Guatemala.
Mm-hmm.
Then what was the next change in your ministry? Where
Well,
did you go from there?
The next change really what my ministry is coming home. I came home for a little while, and I met this young lady. Well, I got reignited or reunited with this young lady. Her name is Denise, of course, my wife.
Sure.
And we weren't married at the time, and she was determined. Now she's got different stories than I do, but I got the truth, and the Lord knows. But she is I think she snagged me. She had a plan, and she carried it out well, and so we ended up. The long story short, we didn't date very long this time. We dated earlier in life, and we broke up, but this time we didn't date very long, and we got married. And it wasn't long. We went on a mission trip right after that. My wife went with me because she knew missions were my calling.
Still a missionary.
Yeah, and so we went on a mission trip for a week, to get her to taste of it, see how it's going to go. And she cried the whole week. Not for a good cry, a bad cry. She just, because we had a daughter already. And so she went she's missing home, missing her daughter, missing her mom, probably more than anybody. But we went, and I thought, I've ruined my life. My whole life has changed now. I'm not going to be able to do what I've been called to do. I'm really concerned about this. But anyway, we're married, and of course, when I make a commitment to my wife, as she's made a commitment, we're committed, period, for life. And so we were married for some time, and then finally, I got a good job at Toyota Motor Manufacturing in Georgetown, Kentucky. And I'm trying to make it shorter here, but we built a new house, had 2 cars, 2 kids, American dream. And we were more miserable than we'd ever been in our life. More miserable than both of us. Because I was working a lot. She was home with the kids a lot. We weren't having much time together. Newly married, young married. Mm-hmm. And so it became a real hard place for us, actually. It was really hard. And so finally, after certain circumstances, I'm not going to get into details, but certain things happened. We come to a place where both of us realized, I believe, that something's got to change or we're not going to make it together. And so we both knew we needed God back in our life, or more in our life. We need to get more dedicated, more centered on God. And all this other stuff that we've been worried about, we need to put it to the side and put God first. And so we did that. Thank the Lord. God brought us back to our right mind, if you will, like the prodigal son. And when we did that, I tell you, it almost immediately it changed our life. It got us back focused and reignited and reunited together. And we was at church one Sunday evening, not too long after this all was going on. And I'm still working at Toyota, making really good money, best I've ever made at that time. And she looked at me one Sunday night at church, and she says, "We need to move to Guatemala." And I looked at her and I said, "Honey, I love you, and I'm glad we're doing better," or something along these lines. But no way. But we're moving to Guatemala, and you get down there for a week and then want to come home, and we've sold everything, lost everything, and we were having to rebuild again. I said, "Not going to happen." I said, "Now we can go for a week and we'll see how it goes." We went down to Guatemala for a week on a mission trip. And we did. She cried. But this time she didn't cry to come home. She cried because she had a passion and a heart for those people. I knew. And she knew that's where God called us. So we went home and sold everything we had, the new house, the cars, everything we had. And we bought a little old used Toyota pickup, put our clothes in the back and just a few belongings. And we shipped it to Guatemala and then flew down there and became missionaries as a family. And by that time, I was married, of course, and had 2 young, when I say young girls, my 2 daughters. And not only my mom and dad didn't like it because we're taking the grandkids, but also her mom and dad wasn't too keen on it either. And they were Christians. So it was hard. It was hard for them. But we knew God had called us. And we were poorer than we had ever been. And I tell you, God used that time in both of our lives to grow us. and to mold us and shape us. And it changed our marriage. It changed our direction. It changed everything. From that point on, we've had some rough spots, but we've never really had that rough spot because we learned to support each other, but most of all, keep God in our focus of our life. And it changed who we were, changed everything. So we lived there for some time. She helped me deliver some babies. And so we stayed there for about a year. And then we decided to come home. But I told her, I said, Denise, she asked me one day, she said, so honey, what's the plan? I said, what do you mean? What's the plan? She says, well, what's the plan? Is it to stay here from now on or is it to go home? Or what's the plan? I said, well, you know what? I think the plan is, and I really feel that if we're supposed to go home, we're going to pastor a church. She kind of sat back and looked at me strange, and she says, but you've never pastored a church. I said, I know. She says, but nobody knows you want to pastor a church. I said, I know. She said, so we're going to live here forever, right? I said, well, we may do it. We're maybe living here forever. It was just a couple of weeks down the road. And this gentleman came down, a brother in the Lord, and he came down from Indiana, Newcastle, Indiana. He came to visit, just the mission and things. We were showing him around and doing different things with him. And all of a sudden, we didn't know him before this trip. Mm-hmm. And he got closer to the end of the trip, I think, and we were driving him somewhere. And he started talking he says, you know, what you guys are doing here is really pretty amazing. You know, what God's using you a big way. And he says, I'd hate to take you away from him. He said, but have you ever considered pastoring a church? And I looked at my wife and she looked at me and we kind of just smiled at each other. And I said, well, you know what? We thought about it. I said, and so he starts telling us about this little church up in Newcastle, Indiana, about needs a pastor really bad. And they really would love to have us come to be their pastors. And so we prayed and we talked and finally long story short, trying to make it shorter is we prayed and we said, you know what, we'll pastor the church. We had no idea what the church looked like, what it was going on, nothing about it. We just knew this is the next step in our ministry. And so we went to Newcastle, Indiana, and we started pastoring that church. And boy, that was a growing experience as well. But it was a good experience. We met some of the wonderful people and the church grew, praise the Lord. It really grew well. And I mean, it wasn't one of the mega churches by any means, but it got from like 15 to maybe 60 or 70 people. So it really done well. We're just glad to see it and be a part of that. But it was a part of our ministry. So we enjoyed it and our kids grew. We learned to become pastors and that was a learning experience, as you can imagine.
How did you feel when your time in that pastorate was kind of coming to a close?
Yeah.
When you began to know that?
You know, every transition from Guatemala to pastoring a church and then pastoring a church to moving to Lifeline, which is another mission we started working with, it was hard. And the reason it's hard is not because it's a different job or a different role. The hard part was for us, for me particularly, but for me and my wife, was that every step we built all these relationships. Mm-hmm. We have connected and become a part of their lives and their families and the world. And so when you move from Guatemala to Indiana, another foreign country, then it's difficult to separate. That separation becomes difficult. And so even in a church that, you know, God called us to for a while, we knew more than likely it was just a season that we was going to be there. Mm-hmm. Man, it was one of the hardest things I had to do to tell them that we're going to resign from the pastorate. But I made a commitment to those folks, and I kept the commitment, thank the Lord, that when we resign, we won't leave until we find you a pastor, which was a big commitment because it was a smaller church, and it's hard to find pastors for those kind of churches. Right. But God put the right person in place, and now he's still pastoring there today, and that's been many years ago. But it was very difficult to make those changes. Mm-hmm. Because when we told that little church had grown and was really right. excited and energetic and things, but so that we were planning, you know, God has called us something else. It was hard. But we were convinced, I was convinced for sure, that the next step was God's step. And so that made it easier for us. And the next step was a gentleman by the name of Arnold Lemke that lives in Niles, Michigan. We both frequent a church camp meeting. And for a year, when we got to the dinner time, was in line to get our dinner after the evening service, he asked me, he says, why don't you plan? He says, I'm going to retire. Why don't you plan on won't you be a part of Lifeline? And I want you to become the president of the mission. And I would graciously say the nice thing that a Christian says is, I'll pray about it, which means no way, what I mean, in a nice way. Yeah. And so, but we talked about it a little bit, but that was the end of it. The next year, the second year, he done the same thing. He says, why don't you consider being the president? I said, well, we'll pray about it, and it's kind of the same situation. We were busy growing a church and that kind of thing. He done that the third year, and I don't know if he planned it that way, but he got behind us every time and behind that meal in the line, and he says, I'd really like you to consider being president. And at that point, I told Brother Lemke, I said, listen, we really will take this to prayer and be serious about it. My wife and I, and we'll be praying, and just give me a little bit, and let me see what God says. And God really laid it on our heart just to make this transition to this mission. And so that was the beginning of our life in Lifeline, which is pretty much the lion's share of our ministry of who we became, because we is still involved in Haiti, and it's been over 15 years. We worked grew and became the president of mission. I was there for over 11 years in that ministry. And my goodness, the miracles that God done in Haiti through that ministry still blesses me today to think about it, and how God moved and shaped people and saved lives, literally saved lives in that mission. It was dramatic. But my wife, Brother Lemke, we had known him for quite some time, and he came to church and was telling us all these stories and tell us what happened in Haiti and the voodoo and all the things that's going on. And then one, I think later on in life, my wife looked at me. She says, you know what? I'm pretty amazed at what God's doing. I said, what are you talking about? She says, well, I didn't think anybody could feel, or I think she said something like, nobody can feel Brother Lemke's shoes, because he was just amazing, telling stories and what God's doing and using him. And I looked at her and I said, honey, I'm not going to try to fill his shoes. I can't, I'm not him. All I can do is be me.
Right.
And since that time, that's really what I've tried to do, is just be my own person in the Lord. Whatever God wants me to do, that's what I want to be real to people and just be honest and open. But through that ministry, gracious, we went from feeding about 500 kids a day to feeding over 5,000. We went from one school to, I think we had at the end about 15 schools that we fully paid for, functioned, everything. We went to having a medical clinic, doctor, nurses, dental clinic, lab. We had everything, a little hospital basically in that mission. We had a trade school that taught them how to raise their crops, how to make the ground good, how to sow, how to clean, how to do all that stuff, how to make blocks for their own themselves, how to raise a garden out of a desert. Literally, we had a desert in the backyard, and we started making it fruitful. A school that took them all the way up to high school, which is unheard of back then, especially. It was God used that ministry in a lot of different ways. It was a blessing. It was a blessing, and we were. I don't know. It was a lot of time and effort and traveling. I traveled all over the United States, was gone a lot, but this time it was different, because when I traveled, it wasn't just me doing the work. My wife was involved, my kids were involved, and it was us as a family doing the ministry. And so it was a whole different world than just me doing work. This was doing God's work, and it really made us stronger as a family. It was a lot of time and effort, though. As ministry, you've been involved in ministry many years. It takes a lot out of you. But I loved it. I really did. I thought the It's the best thing in the world.
Now, we have a few more minutes here.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us and the people watching today how you came to Moraine to pastor a church.
Yeah, we had just resigned from the mission in Haiti, Lifeline. I don't know, sometime can't remember, my time runs together, maybe a couple of years or something. Other, we were taking a break and just replenishing and rejuvenating because we had adopted a little boy named Jake, and he needed a mom and dad and a family, and so we adopted our little boy. And when we did, I come to the realization that I need to be home, especially for him, because he comes from some pretty drastic, deep needs. And so we had resigned from Lifeline, was going to be home. I got a secular job and was just going attending our home church that we always had been. And I get a call one day. I'm working on actually on a house that we owned, kind of a hunter's cabin. And we get a call one day from a friend of mine, Pastor Russell Hayes. And he calls me, he says, "Hey, how about having lunch?" And I said, "Okay, sure." And I'm in a ditch, we're digging, with putting water lines in or something. And he says, "How about having lunch?" I said, "Well, man, I'm awful dirty right now." I said, "But I'll have lunch, but just know that I'm coming in here, out of a ditch." He says, "That's all right. Come on up." And so we stopped at a little restaurant there in Clay City, Kentucky. And we were talking around the table, and he finally gets to the point because I was thinking I hadn't heard from him in a few years, and all of a sudden he just called me out for lunch. I said, "That's a little odd," but I mean, I was a little keen to what's going on. But he finally says, "You know what? I'm about to retire." I said, "Man, that's great." I said, "Congratulations! I'm so happy you're able to do that." I just thought he was telling me the good news, and he says, "Well, there's more to it." I said, "What's that?" And he says, "Well, I'd like you to consider pastoring a church." I hadn't called, I hadn't put in resumes out, but in just a few weeks or maybe in a month before that, I told my wife, we was talking about it. And I said, I think it's time to get back in full-time ministry. Just a month or so ago. And then all of a sudden he calls me up and he says, "I think I want you to consider pastoring a church in Moraine City first, in Dayton." And I said, "Brother Russ, I am so honored that you would even consider me. Of all the people in the world, you consider me." I said, "I can't tell you how much I really appreciate that." I said, "But that's in Ohio." he said, "Yeah, it's in Ohio." He says, "But I'm telling you, it's one of the best churches I've ever pastored. These people are great. They'll take good care of you." I said, "You know what? I don't disagree with that. I'm sure you're telling me the truth, and I'm sure they're tremendous people." I said, "But it's still in Ohio, isn't it?" And we went around the world 2 or 3 times like that. And finally, I said, "Brother Russ," I said, "I love you. And I really can't tell you how much I appreciate you asking me or even considering me." I said, "But you know what's in Ohio, and I'm really not interested in moving to Ohio." I said, "I appreciate it, but thank you, but no thank you." And then he didn't give up. I appreciate his diligence. He says, "Oh, well, how about you come and preach for me one Sunday?" I said, "Well, man, I'll come preach for you anytime." "Sure, I'll be glad to." And I said, "When you want to," we fixed the date and stuff. And I come up, my wife and I came up to preach a service, just a Sunday morning service for him. He had to be gone for some whatever reason. And I'm telling you, when I preached, and I preached like I typically do, no different. And I mean, the Lord came down and the altar was packed. I mean, from one end to the other, people were just really praying and seeking the Lord. And we went away just excited about the church and said, "Wow, that is awesome. We're just glad to be in the service and part of it." So we had been a month or so later, and Brother Russ calls me up and says, "Hey, won't you come preach for me again?" He says, I'm going to go on vacation this weekend. I need you to come preach." I said, "Sure, we'll be glad to," because we had such a great experience. So we come up and we preach again, and I'm telling you, the Lord moves and blesses, and another altar call. I mean, just a tremendous altar call. And so by that time, we thought, this is crazy. I mean, is it like this all the time? So I called another friend of mine, he's a pastor, Pastor Glenn Sizemore. And he used to pastor the church at Moraine City here. And I said, "Brother Glenn," I said, "I'm really kind of starting to consider pastoring this church. I want to know about the church." I said, tell me the dirt. I mean, I can handle it. Just tell me." I wanted to know what I was getting into. And he says, well, Brother Don, he says, there's a great church. They'll take good care of you. Kind of what Russ told me. I said, well, but I get that. I said, but tell me what's wrong. And he says, the only problem I ever had on that church was that nobody would ever come to the altar and pray, or very seldom. And I looked at my wife, and when she looked at me, and I said, I'm talking to him on the phone, of course, and I said, Brother Glenn, I don't know what happened. I said, but I'm telling you, the Lord moved. The 2 times I preached, and the altars were packed. He said, you need to pastor that church. And so we're sitting there and really starting getting interested in talking about it and things. And I'm telling you, it began to, we prayed about it. And he started telling me that he had even a house that he bought. He has up here, and he says, we had a 3-bedroom, 2-bedroom, or 3-bedroom, 2-bath ranch home, and telling me about it. Mm-hmm. He says, I even got a barn, I said, you should have started with the barn. Because I had a couple of horses. We moved up here. But when we come up here for the tryout for the church, to get to know the people and listen to me preach and things, we had the service. And when we did, we preached Friday, Saturday, and Sunday morning. And then Sunday night, we had just a little different service. And I wanted them to get to know who we were and what our background was. And so we started talking to them. I said, listen, different things about us, our background, our mission work, that kind of thing. And I said, but here's the bottom line. At the end of my glorious speech to them, I said, here's the bottom line. We're here, if we come as your pastor, and you're okay with the status you're in, with status quo, just doing the same things you've always done, not really going anywhere, just kind of being here. I want to ask you, please don't vote for me as your pastor. You'll make me miserable, and then I'll make you miserable. I'll help you find somebody, but I'm not your person. And I said, if you're interested in just status quo, just please pass me by. I'll help you find somebody else. I said, but if you want to see what God really wants to do, and let's give it our whole heart into it and really put our hands to the grindstone, if you want, start seeing what we can do, what God can do. I said, then I'll be happy and honored to be your pastor, and we'll see what God can do with this church. Well, they gave me 100% vote, and we've been here over 7 years now. And I tell you, God's done some pretty miraculous things in this mission field. The church at Moraine City First Church of God in Dayton, Ohio. So I'm thankful we're here.
Well, we are too. And would you say that what you told the congregation back then still remains true today as far as your vision for the church?
100%. In fact, I remind the congregation from time to time, not often, but from time to time, I remind them of the commitment that we made to each other back then. Yeah. And so we're still on that same mission, if you will.
Yeah. It's been interesting to have this conversation, and I know Pastor will probably want to close in prayer, but we thought it'd be fun just to have people get to know Pastor a little bit better, and some of his personal life and such with his family. Pastor, you just close this however you feel to do it. And it's been really great getting to have this conversation.
Thank you, Brother Darrell. And it's been a pleasure to get to be with you always. But thank you for listening in this program. We ask that you be praying, not only for me as the pastor of this church, because I want the direction of God, but be praying for the church. But we want to pray for you, because I know that God wants to use you in mighty ways. The Lord has a purpose and a plan for your life, just like he does mine and everybody else's. He loves you. He cares about you. And he's calling you, whether you realize it or not, he's calling you into a wonderful plan that he has already set for you. The Bible tells us that God goes before us and behind us and all around us. He's there to bless us and help us and protect us and provide for our every need. God wants to bless you right this moment. And my friend, you are God's mission. You're the purpose that he sent his only begotten son to die on the cross so that you might have life and life more abundant, that you might have hope and joy and peace. I'm asking you today, as I begin